class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing 5 bold predictions for the upcoming 21-22 season for the San Jose Sharks. I did a video of this last year, or at least a few months ago, prior to the start of the shortened 2021 season, and let's just say those predictions didn't go particularly well. They ranged from not happening to really off base, but even so, they were rather fun, and so I thought, let's do that again this year. And while in the previous season, they were more geared towards sort of a bounce-back year for specific players and for the team in general, this is more so geared to a more future version of the San Jose Sharks. So first up, we have that Eklund will be Calder competitive this season. So this is, of course, making the prediction that Eklund will not only stay in North America, will not only make it onto the Sharks roster, but will actually have a very good season. Not saying he's going to be able to win the Calder necessarily, and I'm not even saying he's going to be nominated for it, so in the top 3, but I will say he will be in the conversation, especially since a lot of the other players in his draft year, like Owen Powers or Matty Beignets, those 2 players are heading back to college, and as such, it seems if Eklund does indeed play for the San Jose Sharks in this upcoming season, he could have a pretty decent chance at winning the Calder Memorial Trophy, which is, of course, for Best Rookie of the Year. Just from what we've seen from Eklund at the development camp, he clearly has a lot of skill in his game. So, and there, there's a lot of open spots on the Sharks roster, so you never know what could happen. And this is maybe less so of a bold prediction and more so of a hopeful prediction, but we'll see what happens. My next is that Knyazev will play a bunch of games in this upcoming season. In my previous video for the 2021 season, I had predicted that Ryan Merkley would get at the very least a single game that season, and that didn't end up happening. For this prediction, though, I'm taking that a step farther. Not only do I think Knyazev is going to get a game, I think he's going to get enough games to at the very least not even be considered a rookie coming up to the 22-23 season. Knyazev was extremely impressive during the development camp. He definitely has taken multiple steps forward since he was drafted a couple of years ago, and while the Sharks' top 6 is decently solid on the surface, there are still a few question marks with it. First of all, Knyazev, he was a player who really was surprising at the start of last season, but it wouldn't be the first time for the San Jose Sharks that we would see a young defenseman play very well and then come in the next season and not look anywhere near as he did previously. Joachim Ryan is obviously the prime example that I've always given in the past. Looked so good on Brent Burns' pairing for about a year and a half, but then kind of fell off a cliff later on and eventually would end up leaving the San Jose Sharks, would end up getting signed by the Kings, and is kind of irrelevant at this point at the NHL level. So not to say that this will happen with Knyazev, but it is technically a possibility. More likely, though, that if Knyazev is going to find his way into the lineup, it'll likely happen with this bottom pairing. First of all, Marc-Edouard Vlasic already took multiple steps back in terms of ice time this past season. Bob Brunner played him a lot less than he normally does, but if Vlasic's decline in terms of play actually continues going into this next season, you never know, maybe he can find himself as a healthy scratch in certain games. Shemek might be the most vulnerable player to actually being replaced, as he had a pretty disappointing season last year just due to the long-standing knee injury that he has been sort of nursing and dealing with, and had been dealing with long-lasting effects from a few years ago. His ice time went down pretty significantly. His style of play and just his level of play have also gone down quite significantly since, when he really emerged into the NHL as a very solid top 4 defensive defenseman. And so if something was to happen injury-wise with Radim Shemek, or if indeed he isn't really fully recovered still, Knyazev absolutely will be available to take up that 6th spot. Now, I don't think Knyazev is going to be the 7th defenseman, as in at a short-term notice type of replacement. I do suspect someone like a Jacob Middleton or Nicholas Malone will be filling in for like a game here or there. But if there's ever sort of a long-term solution for the San Jose Sharks in this upcoming season, so if a player goes on IR, or if there really is some sort of problem with, Shemek or Knyazev's level of play, I think Knyazev will indeed get some games this coming year. Third prediction has to do with Barabanov. Was picked up at the trade deadline this past season in a trade with the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Sharks sent over Suomela. Barabanov immediately managed to crack the Sharks lineup and looked very good on a line with Kane and Hurdle. Now, it seems likely that Kane will not be with the San Jose Sharks in this upcoming season, but with Barabanov, it wasn't a situation where he was surrounded by two very good players and so his sort of production got carried. Barabanov was definitely holding his own on that line, was definitely making a lot of things happen for him. So while he'll likely still find himself in the top 6, he might not find himself with as good of a player as he was with last season, which was of course Evander Kane, the Sharks' best player last year. But I do still think Barabanov is going to have a lot of success in this upcoming season. He just seems like the type of player who is playing in a way that can lead to a lot of success, and as such I think Barabanov will get at the very least 50 points in this upcoming season and can be a top 5, maybe even top 3 scorer on the San Jose Sharks, depending on how some other players bounce back, Meyer or Couture. The fourth bold prediction is that one of the Sharks' many bottom 6 type of players will surprise this season. Now, when I say surprise, I mean, break out of the kind of consistent performance that we've seen from bottom 6 players from the San Jose Sharks over these past few years, where they're kind of like playing maybe 50, 60 games in a season, getting something like 10 to 15 points. I'm expecting one of these players to find a relatively consistent spot in the lineup and potentially put up somewhere in the 30 to 40 point range, get a consistent spot on the third line, potentially even challenge for a top 6 spot if a player like Rudolf Balcers somewhat falters. And I don't know who specifically this might actually end up happening to, as there's a lot of players who it could. There's Chekovich, Shemelevsky, Dahlin, Peterson, even though a player like Noah Gregor, Joachim Blickfeld. There is a ton of competition in the bottom 6 for the San Jose Sharks. John Leonard is also another option as well, and I do think one of them is going to emerge out on top as someone who Bob Brunner can lean on a bit more, especially since there are kind of 2-ish open spots on the third line. You could say, oh, Matt Nieto and Andrew Cogliano will get those decent spots, but that's definitely not set in stone, and I think one of those players is going to definitely emerge as someone Bob Brunner is going to lean on somewhat significantly, getting 13-14 minutes a night, power play ice time. I just don't know who that's going to be. And the final bold prediction for this upcoming season is that the San Jose Sharks are going to make a huge trade. I didn't think this was going to happen about a month ago, but now with the likely departure of Evander Kane, I feel like a lot of the plans for the this next season and for the next couple of years after that kind of change. Evander Kane was a big part of the Sharks offense, but with him gone, they don't really have a player to fill in that void, and I don't think it's in the correct move to try and sign another middle-aged type of player to a long-term deal to fill in that void, because the Sharks window they should really be targeting is in a few years from now. And so while I don't think that huge trade is going to involve one of the unmovable contracts that the Sharks have, so I don't suspect Vlasic or Erik Karlsson will end up getting traded away, I'm talking about the more aggressive and more possible trades, players like Timo Meier or Tomas Hertl or Logan Couture. And I don't know if this trade might happen, over the next month prior to the start of the season, if this will happen somewhere at the trade deadline, or maybe this will happen near the next draft of 2022. But I am predicting that a huge trade will indeed happen. If I had to bet on a player, this is not a player who I want to see traded, but I can definitely see it happening. It would be Tomas Hertl, the final year of his contract. Very, very affordable at this point for what he actually brings to the table. So this could likely happen, or potentially happen, at a trade deadline if there's a team really looking to add a dangerous force, a very good player at the deadline. Tomas Hertl is absolutely an option for them if the Sharks are actually looking to shop him around, and the Sharks could get a massive haul of assets. Just think back to the Taylor Hall trade a couple of years ago, and while Hall was a very good player and maybe at his peak ahead of Tomas Hertl in terms of play, Hall was very much not really playoff battle tested at all, wasn't necessarily having that fantastic of a season, and still managed to get a pretty decent haul of assets from the Arizona Coyotes, if I'm not mistaken. Tomas Hertl has proven himself in the past in the playoffs. He's a very consistent player. He's definitely a player who is very built for the playoffs, just the way he plays the game. So that is an option. But just in general, I think a huge trade could be in the cards for the San Jose Sharks. But that will do it for this video. As I mentioned earlier, none of my bold predictions for the previous year actually ended up coming true, so take all of these predictions with a grain of salt. It's possible that maybe a couple here or there will happen, but it's also possible none of them will end up being the case, but it is still fun to predict. Class dismissed.